Earlier, we talked about the value of solitude and why you would want to incorporate that in your life. Now we want to talk about some very specific things you can do when you're actually taking time for solitude. And I hope this will be helpful for you, especially if this is your first time, if you want to try solitude for the first time. This is a 6-part process that, as you're going to see, they're just some suggestions, and sometimes it works out this way, sometimes it doesn't exactly work out this way, but I think they'll be helpful to you, especially if this is your first time. The first step is actually to just surrender the time you have. If it's 2 hours, then it's a moment of saying, God, I just want to surrender these next 2 hours for you. If you've taken a longer period of time, like a half a day or even longer, again, doesn't matter how much, it's an important first step to surrender that time back to God. For me, when I was having a day of solitude, I think this was a couple of years ago, I found a journal that gives an example of this process in my own life. I was reflecting on how now I've got no more appointments. I finally cleared away working, I said, this week to create space for solitude, and wanted to do that and was eager for that. But then very early on in this journal entry said, so I want to give this time over to you. It's not a big, long, or eloquent thing to say, but it's important from almost a transactional basis to say, God, I want to give this over to you. So you first give over your time, but then secondly, a next step is to figure out, what do I really need right now? At any given time, we may need any number of things during different seasons of life and in our spiritual journey with God. We may need joy or a sense of hope or direction. We may need wisdom. We may need forgiveness and compassion. Who knows what that is, but it's a good thing for us to, as we're starting out into this time, figure out, do a gut check. What do I really need right now? It might be a writing in a journal or just prayer as you're talking to God or just thinking about it. For me, on this particular day, I found myself immediately after surrendering the time saying, I feel like I miss you, God. I miss hearing from you. And I had this really bizarre dream, and I don't really know what that was about. It seemed to be drawing from some people in my past, and I didn't know what that was about. So I was asking, as we'll see in this next step, I was asking for some clarity, asking for some understanding, and surrendering this day back to you. So once you go through this process of discerning, it's important to do that very next thing and actually ask for what it is you think, you sense you need. Sometimes we know, but we're hesitant to be vulnerable and say, God, I really would love your help with this. And that's an important thing. We don't get to demand things of God, but it's a really important thing for us to request and to lay our requests before him. So while those 3 items really represent half of this list, from a timing standpoint, it may just be a matter of minutes. Could be less than 15 minutes, could be more. You may get really stuck here and trying to figure out, God, what's current for me? But as a guideline, it doesn't really take that long. It's just an important way to begin the process. From then on out, you want to, I would suggest, going straight to the scriptures. What does God have to say to you today, given your need? If you have never done this before, a great place to start is the 23rd Psalm, and to just read it maybe once or multiple times and see what God has to say to you in the words of the 23rd Psalm. For me, on this particular day, there were several different passages that I ended up looking at and ended up feeling particularly drawn to the story in Luke 24, where the disciples are coming back, as it turns out, to the empty tomb. And I can read it for you here, where the angels are in the empty tomb. Jesus is not, but the disciples are looking for them, or for him. And the disciples turn to these angels and ask, and the angels look back and say, Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here. And as I was reading through that story, and I don't remember for sure, but odds are I probably read through it a few times, I wrote this. I rewrote that phrase, why do you seek the living among the dead? And beneath that I said, that's a powerful phrase. It's a powerful phrase. And I began moving into this 5th stage of responding to God based on what you're hearing. And I wrote, it feels like it calls to me now, but I didn't know why. I wrote, why? Is there a way that I do this, that I seek the living among the dead? And I began asking myself a lot of questions, asking God, and beginning to respond to God with something I sensed him calling to my attention. For me, the response ended up, for me noticing that I sometimes need to seek Jesus' presence now among what's current in my life, and not always reflecting back to the past. So what's current? What's real? What's true? Where is God here among the living? But even as I was writing these observations, the next statement I wrote was, I'm not sure I get it. I'm not sure I know what you're saying to me, God. But it was the process of responding to God. What did he said to me, and what did he want that, how would that translate to my life? So after responding to God, what that may look like, I would suggest before finishing a time of solitude, is actually moving to a time of closure. And for me, I know on that particular day, there were some circumstances that had me tempting to always go back and try to figure out, well, did that happen, or why did that happen? And that verse was helping me go, no, why do you seek the living among the dead? The past is dead, it's gone. You need to seek the living among the living and be seeking Jesus where he is, right here, right now. And so for me, that brought me a time of prayer, of closure, saying, God, that's the way I want to live. Help me learn how to do that better. So again, it doesn't take much time, but it's important before you move into the rest of your day to bring some closure to the experience and sort of solidify, what did I hear from God, and how might he want me to move forward from this time as a result. Now, one last question that some folks ask is, how often would I move into a time of solitude? How often do I need this? How often should I do solitude? There's no right or wrong answer other than as long or as often as you need to, as it takes for your soul to receive what you need. Many people find it helpful to build a weekly or more often a monthly rhythm for solitude. Sometimes it's an every other month thing or even a quarterly basis. But if this is your first time, I would just urge you to try 1 2-hour time of solitude and see what God has to say to you in that time.